Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, depending in what part of the world you are. And welcome to the 15th session of the summer semester of the SunoikisisDC Digital Classics. So today we have a seminar on the Coptic Scriptorium project, and it will be discussed thoroughly by our guest, that is Caroline Schröder from the University of the Pacific. And now, without further ado, I'm gonna give the floor to Carrie for the seminar on the Coptic Scriptorium.
Great. Good morning. Thank you. So I will have some slides that I'll go through, and before I do that, I just want to point out there are a few links that are on the GitHub page for the site, and the main one through which you can access almost everything I'm going to talk about, let me screen share, is our main project site. So hold on, let me screen share again, and so this is our main project site, and it has links to all of our primary research resources. So I'll be coming back to this, and the link is just copticscriptorium.org. So, all right, well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and talk a bit about our project. I am assuming that not everybody here knows Coptic, but that some folks who view may or may end up interested in Coptic afterwards, in which case, if you do know Coptic or you become interested, please feel free to get in touch if you have more questions about the project or if you have ideas about collaborating. So who we are is an open source and open access research platform for Coptic language and literature. So, one of our goals is kind of to be like the Perseus digital library for Coptic. And Coptic is the last phase of the ancient Egyptian language family. So it's descended from the hieroglyphs, and it was used, primarily in the Roman Empire and the sort of early Byzantine, early Islamic period. And it sort of fades out of use as you get further into the Islamic period, sort of 11th, 12th, 13th centuries. It begins to fade out of daily use. And our manuscripts for Coptic, the classical Coptic, peak around 10th, 11th, 12th centuries and then fade off. There are a number of dialects. We primarily work with the classical dialect that's called Sahidic, but we will leave that information for further interests if people have interest in dialects. So today I'm just going to go over a little bit about what you can do with our project, how you can, how we built our project, what some of our challenges are in the research, and what some new opportunities and new avenues for research may be. So today there are a number of projects working in Coptic. It's kind of exciting. This screen used to be much more blank just a few years ago. One of the founding projects is in the lower left, the CMCL in Rome, and it digitized a bunch of manuscripts and has some identifiers for authors, manuscripts, works. It is behind a password because a subscription service is how they fund their work. We also have our project, Coptic Scriptorium. If you're a papyrologist, you may be familiar with papyri.info, which has both Greek and Coptic papyri. There's a digital edition of the Coptic Old Testament project in Göttingen that is trying to digitize all manuscripts of the Coptic Old Testament texts. There's a new Coptic magical papyri project. And several years old is this project called Marcian. And that's an interesting one because it's not founded by an academic. It's somebody who is a programmer who just became interested in Coptic texts. And then last, one of the newest projects is this project called Paths, which is an atlas and database of Coptic manuscripts that will show you where they are and where they're from in the world, and has a lot of information about manuscripts. So that's a really great project as well. So there's now a whole digital Coptic ecosystem of which we are just one little part. And our goals are very specific. We want to create, digital Coptic text for research. And so part of that involves having a very richly annotated corpus of Coptic texts. And I'll explain those annotations in a minute. Visualizing text for reading, people who don't necessarily want to search. Maybe they want to practice their reading and translation. Tools to process and machine annotate Coptic, and I'll go through those in a minute. Data models and data curation for digital work. And then, of course, we do research on our texts that we're digitizing and annotating. And we are striving to have a platform where others can also contribute to the project. And of course, we want to have fun, because if we're not having fun, then we are not doing it right. So those are our project goals. And Valeria, if you ever have any questions or think anything needs to be clarified, please chime in. Okay?
Will do. Thanks.
All right. Great. All right. So currently, the project leaders are Amir Zeldes, who's a linguist and associate professor of linguistics at Georgetown, and then myself. But we have a number of other people who've worked on the project. Whoops, sorry, I went too fast. So we have some senior editors who've been with the project for a while, and other staff, and all of our project team is on our About page. We also, of course, want to thank our funders, who I need to mention at every presentation. We have been fortunate to have funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities here in the United States, and through collaborations in Europe from the DFJ and the BMBF in Germany, as well as different college and university institutions. So thank you to our funders, without whom this would not be possible. So I said I would start with what we can do with the project. Some of these screenshots are from a prior version of our website, and but it's all the same. And so I will go through a few things, and then I will do it live. I'll do the slides, and then I'll try to show some examples live. So one of the first things you can do is read Coptic. So if you go to our website, and this is, also really for people who are students learning, or people who just want to read and practice translating, you can read or browse our texts, and you can just click on our website, browse corpora, and you can filter by texts. So the letters of the monastic author Beza, for example, you could read, or you could filter by author, right? So here we'll look at Beza's letters here. And you can read our texts in various different visualizations. So this diplomatic visualization here, it may take a second to get loading. It'll take a second to load the visualization, is the image of the manuscript. And I don't know why the text is not coming up. There it is. The image of the text as it appears on the manuscript. So just a manuscript transcription. And you also can view it in a sort of normalized version, which has all the Coptic words, written out in a way that's easy to read. And I'm clicking on a Greek word for those of you who know Greek. Coptic has a lot of Greek loanwords. For many of our texts where there's a translation, if you hover over this sort of normalized versified text, you can see the English translation pop up, and you can also see this appears as a link, and that is linked to our online dictionary, which I'll show in just a minute. We also have another visualization you can read that's called analytic, that this is really good for language learners as well, because it has the normalized text, the part of speech. So you can see, I don't know if you can see that. I'll zoom in. The V is for, that's a verb, and the English translation in alignment. So if you don't know Coptic, or you don't know Coptic very well, or you want to read the text and translation together, that's one visualization. And all of these visualizations are created from a base transcribed text with annotations. And I'll show you those annotations in a minute. But we don't, transcribe 3 different versions. We transcribe once, and we apply processing tools to the text and annotate them, and then use those annotations to create these visualizations. So you can see there are a number of visualizations. Let's go back to the slide real quick, for which you can filter. And as I said, the normalized text is linked to our online dictionary, and if there's a translation, will pop up. Not all of the texts have an English translation, but many do. The dictionary, which I'll show you in just a moment, is a resource that was created in collaboration with partners in Germany. And the Berlin Brandenburg Academy has this project, the Thesaurus Lingua Egyptii, which is creating a thesaurus and lexicon of Egyptian in all phases and of the language, hieroglyphs through to Coptic. And so the Coptic piece of that lexicon, they have a lexicon file that they created, and we over at Coptic Scriptorium helped put it online as a searchable dictionary. And then just recently, another project called the Dictionary and Database of Greek Loanwords added all the Greek loanwords in Coptic to the lexicon from their data set. So now we have a Coptic dictionary online that you can search that has Coptic words and all the Greek loanwords in Coptic. Primarily, again, in the Sahidic dialect is what we're working with right now. Although there are some terms that are in other dialects. So this is an example of the entry, and I picked one that is a Greek loanword for people who might know Greek. If you don't know Coptic, hopefully this will at least be recognizable to you. And you can see the entry has a stable identifier, the Thesaurus Lingua Egyptii identifier, whoops, and then definitions. And the dialect, the S says it's Sahidic. You can see the information from the dictionary and database for Greek loanwords. There's the Greek lemma, and information on how to cite the project. If you are looking for a, let's pick a Coptic word, this word here, and we'll open it in a new tab. You'll see for the Coptic word, sometimes there's more than one lemma. So here you have a verb and a noun, live and life. And you can see the entry will have the English translation, French, German, very basic translations, but also links then to a digital PDF of the primary Coptic dictionary that everyone uses, by Walter Crum. So that if you need a more thorough entry for the Egyptian Coptic word, the link goes to the big Coptic dictionary that everybody uses in PDF form, and you can find a more thorough file. So we're really excited about this dictionary because lots of people all over the world use it, and we think it's a major step forward in studying Coptic. And one of the things that we've been able to do then is to link our texts to the dictionary. So if you're reading along and you don't know a word, you can immediately look it up in the dictionary. The other exciting thing is that it links back. It's bidirectional. So if you look at this entry here for onc to live, you'll see our little logo, the Coptic C. This links back to our database. So you can search for attestations in our database. I'll click on it in a minute. I'll just show you the other little sigla here. We also have a frequency list of the frequency information about this word in our database. And we have, if there are a number of attestations of this word, we will give you collocation information for our database as well. And that top collocation, enech, is forever. That number one word. So eternal life is the top collocation in our database. So let me click on our little logo here, and it will take you to our database. And I can show you some of the things that you can do in our database. So I've shown you first one way you can read texts. All those visualizations are drawn from annotations on the text, and all those annotations can be searched. So we can see here in this screen our database. You can access the database directly from our website, our home site. So corpora was where we were reading. Dictionary, you can go directly to the dictionary clicking here. And our database for simple or complex searches across all of our documents is right there. So this is a search for that word for to live or life. And you can see it's searched for the lemma, the dictionary head word, and in the lower left are the collections of texts that you can search. So if you want to search documentary papyri, we only have 3 papyri. It's not going to be a lot of hits, but we have other texts like the Old Testament, right? Or a famous monastic author named Shunuta. We have a number of texts of his. So you can search in all of them, or you can just select a few, corpora if you want to do a more limited search. And then on the right, you see all of the hits. And if you open this little annotations, you can see all of the annotations on the words in our text. So you see there's the lemma, which again is linkable to the dictionary, the normalized form of our word. So here's our onach here, to live, and there's the normalized form. And then the transcription from as it appears in the manuscript, the original, which is what you see in that manuscript visualization I showed a few minutes ago. We have part of speech annotation. We have syntax annotation. If you have a translation, there's a translation. And we have stable identifiers for each sentence. And all of these are searchable. So if you wanted to search, for example, for, the lemma followed by, another word. So we'll pick that collocation that we had just a moment ago. So you can search for this lemma for living, followed by another one. And if you don't have Coptic in your computer as a font, we have a little keyboard and you can type it up. So we'll see what happens if we search for these 2 words, one followed by the other. And no matches found. How about this followed by all prepositions. So you can search for this word followed by prepositions, right? Or you can search for Greek loanwords. Let's say you want to figure out all the verbs used by an author for a particular, all the verbs used by an author that are Greek loanwords, right? What verbs, what action words are used? You can look for the part of speech for verb, and the annotation overlaps with a language annotation. And we'll do this for my favorite author, Schröder, and see what verbs he uses that are Greek. And here we have a number of verbs like metanoia, right? Or chrea. That is the verb part, right? So to need. And you can get a whole list. You can download the hits. You can do a frequency analysis. I won't go through that right now because it's more detail than you need. But those are the kinds of things you can do. You can do very simple searches for words, or you can add different annotations together. So to just review, the annotations that you can search for are word forms. You can search for parts of speech, nouns, verbs, prepositions, language of origin. You can also add metadata, right? If you want to look for a particular author, you want to look for, all the instances of a word that are in a particular codex. You want to look for, paleographic information like page numbers or anything that's written in red ink, right? If the scribe used red ink, that will be annotated, and you can search for that. Or combinations of all of these. And they show up in our database here. Okay. So the searching can be complex searches. They can be simple searches. We have a number of tutorials that give you examples of how to use our search syntax. I'm going to just give you a couple examples here of some of the searches that I do because I'm interested in children, right, in early monastic texts. So you can search for son or daughter. You can search for the specific term boy or girl, which is in Coptic is son or daughter followed by the term little, which will give you 17 hits instead of 126. And then you can filter further, right? Okay, I only want to search for children in the works authored by Schröder. And you can filter that way. And if you go to our database and you click on any of these, we'll go to a clean screen, right? If you just go straight to our database, you'll see these are a number of sample searches. So if you just want to play around with it, you don't really know how it works, you want to play around with it, you can search for all proper names, right? You can search for all of these words, nuta, which is the word for God. And each corpus, like if you click on this corpus, the saying of the Desert Fathers, it will give you some sample queries, again, of things that you can start out with to start playing around. We also have some sample queries on our website as well. So I know going through this kind of material very quickly in a presentation can be a little overwhelming. It's a flood of information, but we do have these sample queries embedded here. If you don't know Coptic, you can search for English translations. The easiest thing to do really is to search for that translation in the dictionary and then try to link back. So let's say you don't know Coptic, right? And you're doing book history. So let's search for the word for book. You can do it up in this quick search, and you can do it also in the definition language in the main search page. So the main interface page, right? You can search in the definition for book in English, Or you can search up here in the quick search. I often just use the quick search myself because that bar is always up there. So I want to do book history. I'll search for the word book in the dictionary. And it's being slow this morning. And we see a ton of entries that contain the word book in the definition. And of course, some of these are not actually books, right? So apostolos, that's not a book. It just happens to have book in somewhere in the definition. But we look down, we have biblos, which would be Greek for book. And then scroll all the way down and we find my Coptic word. So jooma for a bundle or parcel of papyrus, you could look for that. That's an Egyptian word. You might not be familiar with it if you don't know Coptic. This might be the kind of word you need to know if you want to find an instance in Coptic, right? And so you can click on that entry and then click on our database and it will search for all the instances of that word in the database. So my suggestion, if you don't know Coptic, but you are interested in seeing a particular thing, like a particular word like book, if you're interested in book history, or if you're interested in children, for example, like I am, you can search back in the database and then see if any of these hits have translations for it, right? So that's something you can do with our project, even if you don't know Coptic. There might be information for you that is there. All right. Valeria, anything, or if there's anybody else who is online, anything that needs clarification or I should review before continuing on?
No, not my part so far. I don't know if Anise or Irina want to ask something. No, I don't think so. No, go on. That's great.
Okay, great. All right. So you can do even more complex searches. For example, like you can look for collocations. So for example, this monastic author I mentioned, Shunuta, how does he talk about God, right? This would be a research question that somebody in religious studies or in the history of monasticism might be interested in. So I did this search for the purpose of, presentations. And then I downloaded the number of hits for each word and then made a visualization in another visualization program. And so you can see very easily in the visualization, the top hits actually for words, the top three words, the three words that are around the words for God. I searched for God, Jesus, Christ, and Lord. Those are all words that are used to talk about God. God, Jesus, Christ, and Lord. And you can see God, Lord, and Jesus are also top collocations for God, Jesus, Christ, and Lord, right? They're all collocations for each other, right? They all appear, when somebody says God in Coptic, when Shunuta says God, he often will say the Lord God, or he will say, when he says Jesus Christ, he says Jesus Christ, right? But other words, and this is a digital humanities type of research question, how do people talk about certain things? Some of these are function words or words that don't have a lot of content, like the or and. But some of them are content words, like speak is one of the top hits, and cast or throw is one of the top hits, right? So if you know Shunuta, you will see this and you will think, oh yes, Shunuta says God speaks, right? God says do this. God says do that. Or God says in the Bible this. God, said to me in a vision this, right? Or a dream. So the speak one makes a lot of sense. Cast or throw might be puzzling if you don't know monastic sources, but Shunuta is a leader of a monastery and he's a fairly strict one. And he will often talk about how if people sin, they are cast out or thrown out of the monastery or the community. And so it's interesting to see that this is in fact one of the top words that is associated with God, to cast or to throw. And probably if you were to dig into the context, you would see that the context is casting or throwing people out of the community for sin. That's a little interesting bit of research. That's the kind of research that you can do. So I'm going to say a few things about how we built it. Before I do that, I want to say for your research results and also for all of our data, you can download your results for your searches, but you also can download source files in multiple formats. And almost all of them are licensed Creative Commons attribution, so CC BY. So almost all of them are licensed in a format that you can reuse. There are a few texts that we have that came from other sources, right? Other people transcribed and then gave us their data that we then annotated. And for some of those, there's a more restrictive license. But for almost all of our material, it's CC BY, and every document file has the licensing information if you have questions. And you can download them on our GitHub site. So when you're in that reading, browsing, you can see there are these little buttons that will take you to the TEI or our database files. Our database is ANIS. They will take you to the folder that contains TEI XML, the database files, or we have another format of text called Paula XML that you can also download. I will say, if you go and download, if you click on these buttons, they will take you to, hold on, I'll just show you real quick. They will take you to our GitHub site, and we'll just click on the TEI. They will take you to our GitHub site where you can download our corpora. So this is the TEI of those letters of Beza. Our TEI XML, I'm assuming that since we're at week 15, everybody knows what TEI XML is by this point. So if not, it's a format that is used to mark up text that a lot of people who work on ancient texts and digital text projects use. So, we had, this folder has all the TEI XML files. We have several file formats for our corpora. So our Beza letters, you can see those are our ANIS. Those are our database files. Paula XML, which is a different kind of XML format. TEI. And then this TT is tree tagger, which is a part of speech tagger format. So tree tagger format of actually SGML. And this, if you know Coptic and you like to play around with annotated text, this format might actually be the format you might want to use to just play around with it, because it has all of our annotations in one flat file. The TEI is a lossy format. As I'm going to explain in a moment, we have very complex annotation process. Not all of it can be captured in TEI XML. So the TEI has some of our annotations, like the lemma, like the manuscript information, pages in the manuscript, column breaks, line breaks, but not all of the linguistic annotations. The tree tagger, Paula, and ANIS have our full annotations. All right, so these are all, licensed under a, CC BY license, and you can download them, play around with them, republish them, whatever you want. So how do we make all this? So those are some of the things you can do. Now, to go under the hood, how do we make all this? I'm in religious studies. I do philology and history of religion, and I work with manuscripts. My colleague Amir over at Georgetown is in linguistics. This is an inherently interdisciplinary project, right? We we're doing research and creating resources that can be used by people in classics, biblical studies, papyrology, linguistics, history, Egyptology. And so our process is somewhat complex and is also interdisciplinary. So the first thing we do is we take Coptic text in a digital format, and we have to do what's called tokenizing it. So this is typically the first stage in any natural language processing work. So in linguistics, the process of annotating text for linguistic information is often called natural language processing. And the first step is to break the text up into words. Now, Coptic is complicated because it has words, but these words are often bound together in what we call bound groups. It's a little bit like Arabic in that sense. If you know Arabic, it's a little bit different from Arabic as well. But if you don't know another agglutinative language or you don't know Coptic, that's probably the best analogy. So this example I have here, the green is like a conjunction, G. The purple is a converter that tells you this is a relative clause or something of some kind. The alpha here in red tells you this is past tense. The iota in blue is the subject. And then the black and brown together is the verb. The verb monachos, which is to become a monk. So this whole thing together is actually a whole clause or phrase, since I became a monk, but it typically appears as one unit. And people will type it into their computer as one unit. So when you have a bunch of digitized Coptic text, the first thing you need to do is to break it into these constituent parts. So the G, the nt, the a, the e, the monachos are all separate lexical units. So the first thing we do is tokenize it. And break it into pieces. And then we normalize the spelling and tag for part of speech. So we have a normalizer as a tool, we have a tokenizer as a tool, a normalizer as a tool, and we have a part of speech tagger. And so you can see here in the example, I became a monk, the alpha is a past tense marker, a past tense auxiliary. The iota is a personal subject pronoun. And then monachos is a verb. It happens to be a compound verb. The is the part that makes it a verb, and the monachos is a noun. But put together, monachos is a compound verb. So to become a monk. So I became a monk. So our annotation tools will normalize and when we'll tag for part of speech. But our tools keep all of the original text. So this original G entire monachos stays a unit. Then there's an annotation that breaks it into pieces, a separate annotation that normalizes, an annotation that gives it the part of speech. So you keep all of these layers. Then we also have a language of origin tagger for loan words, because that's a big area of interest in Coptic linguistics and Coptic studies, are words that come in from Greek, Latin, and even later they come in from Arabic. So monachos would get tagged Greek, right, because it's a Greek loan word. Then, of course, we have a lemmatizer that tags the lemmas, or the dictionary headwords. And this is very important for then linking to the dictionary that I showed you. If our words weren't tagged for lemma, the connection to the dictionary would not be as good. Every once in a while, we still do have some broken connections. But for the most part, the connections are pretty smooth. And that's because we annotate every word for its dictionary headword or its lemma. And then that lemma is what's linked to the online Coptic dictionary. If you happen to be watching this and happen to have a project in Coptic that you're interested in linking to the dictionary yourself as well, let me know, and we can talk about that. So these tools are also all open source and open access. We originally had these tools as standalone tools that we would use one by one on the command line that we would run on text on an individual computer. Each person on their individual computer would run them on the command line. But now we have a web service. So you can download the tools, but you can also just use them on our web service. And again, you can access them via our main website portal. If you just click on the tools, you will see a number of tools, especially a link to our Coptic natural language processing service. And here you can see little options for all of the tools I just described, right? So I'm going to skip a couple of them because they're a little complex, but you can see the tokenize right here, right, which will break your Coptic into words, the normalize, which will normalize spelling and orthography, tag is the part of speech tagger, lematizer, language of origin, right? So you can enter your text here, as I've done with my G entire monachos that we've been looking at, and then the natural language processing service will annotate, right? And it looks like this. It comes out in a tagged format where you have your original text and then you have all these annotations, right? So you can see, where's our monachos here? So monachos, right? Monachos is a verb. Whoops. Monachos is a verb. Let me try to draw on this for a second. Right, so here we go. There's our Greek word. It's a verb, to become a monk. That's the lemma or monachos. And it broke it up into two morphemes, the and the monachos. We also have a tool that we've developed to transcribe digitized Coptic text. So one of the challenges of working in Coptic is there's not already like a Perseus, right? Where, Perseus digitized a ton of Greek and Latin out of copyright editions, right? And put them online many, many years ago and continues to do so. And this is an incredible resource for people working in Greek and Latin. But we just didn't have that in Coptic. There are a few of the projects that I listed before that did create digitized text. Some of it, like, one that I mentioned is behind a password. It's a subscription service. Another one, Marcian, had some text. It's adding more, but there's not an equivalent of Perseus. So for a lot of texts, we have to create born digital editions. And they may be texts that haven't even been published in a print edition before. So some of the materials on our website, there's not even a print edition. There's editions that are created straight from somebody getting the photograph of the manuscript from the library and typing it in and publishing on our site. Some of the material on our site has been published in print editions, but some of it has not. And this is because Coptic, is not as well used, and it's not, it doesn't have as many people working in it as Greek and Latin, and also because of the history of the antiquities trade in Egypt, right? Manuscripts came out of Egypt. They got dispersed to lots of different libraries and lots of different places, sometimes page by page, where, a page of one letter by a monastic author might be in Paris, and then the next page might be in London, because they just got broken up on the antiquities trade market. So Coptic is kind of a messier tradition to work in than Greek and Latin for that reason. So a lot of what we do is just digitize text. So we created a tool where we can transcribe and then also annotate. So the tool is called Gitdox, and it was created by Amir and a student of his. It's also open source and can be modified for different languages. So you transcribe the text in a text box here, and then there are buttons at the bottom that link to our online natural language processing web service, where you click on the button and it will annotate the text for you, and it will present it in a kind of layered format where you have the original text on the left, in the left column. Let me get my little pen here. So the original text is over on the left, and then each annotation is a new column. So this is the page number of the manuscript codex, and then, so here are the lemma annotations, right, are in this column. The language annotations for loan words. It looks like the part of speech is off the screen here. But then, you know, an editor can go in and check all the machine processing and say, okay, you know, are the part of speech tags correct? It was the tokenization correct? You know, did it break it into words properly? And then you can edit before publishing. And so we, you know, have this editing environment that we use. Again, this can be modified for other languages. Obviously, it works particularly for our natural language processing service. But if you need just like a lightweight transcription environment, you can do that. You can set up your own validation rules. So if you have a particular annotation schema, right? You're annotating all of your digital text in TEI XML, for example. You can set up validation rules and validate your text to make sure that it's conforming to your rules. And it also is linked to our GitHub repositories. So when we commit our edits down here, right, we can commit, that will commit it to our GitHub repository in a version controlled format, so that everything is version controlled, everything is saved in GitHub in the cloud, and we don't lose anything. So that's kind of how we transcribe and annotate. There are a couple of more complicated tools that I want to show you that we're beginning to roll out. And one of them is annotating for dependency syntax. Now, this is particularly interesting for people who are linguists. Dependency syntax is, you know, showing the relationship between words in a sentence, right? So in the English word sentence on the left down here, right, we have the verb, saw, the subject has been annotated. I is the subject of saw, right? And cat, right, is the object of the verb, saw. And you can do this same kind of annotation in Coptic. And this is important for, you know, linguistic research. It also can be a teaching tool for people who are learning the language, to have them tree bank the language. But all of these annotations are also searchable in our database. So if you wanted to search for all of the subjects of a particular verb, right? This is the verb. This is a verb here. And if you want to look for all the subjects of the verb, actually, no, this looks like it's a noun. I don't see the verb. Where's the verb in here? But if you want to look for all the, this word could be either a verb or a noun. That's why I got confused. But if you want to look for all the words that are modifying this word, you can search for all the words that are dependent on that word. And it would give you this one, right? Ma. It would give you this one, right? So you can look for all these words that are dependent on each other, which is also useful if you want to do linguistics research or even content research. Like, take our example from a little while ago where we looked for all the words that are within 3 words of the terms for God in Shenouda's A Monastic Writer's Writing. You could also specifically look for, okay, I want all the verbs that follow the subject God, right? What does God do in this text? Well, I'll look for the word God and all the verbs that are that God is the subject for. So that's some pretty interesting research you can do with this. So some of the challenges we have a number. The primary one is labor and time. So you can see all those tools take a lot of time to develop, and they also require very high quality annotated data to train them, right? So in order to create our part of speech tagger, we had to annotate a bunch of text to train the tagger, right? In order to have good dependency syntax annotations, we have a graduate student who knows Coptic who's going through and tree banking Coptic to be training data. This takes a lot of time. And that's just in the development of the tools. Then when we publish our annotated text, that takes a lot of time as well, because our tools are not 100% accurate. And so sometimes we will want to go through and check all of the annotations and see, okay, are these annotations correct? That takes a lot of time. Or if we don't have already digitized text and we're transcribing, that takes a lot of time. So, labor and time are number one, our biggest challenge. So issues of canon are also a challenge for us. If you work in Greek and Latin, particularly, well-known classical Greek and Latin literature, you have well-known texts, you have Virgil, you have Cicero, you have Homer, you have Thucydides, and these are all known, and they, the authors are known and identified. Their works are known and they have clear titles, and everybody knows what Homer's Odyssey is, right? Everybody knows what that is. And also they're divided into verses or chapters, right? There's canonical numbering systems for citing and referring to sections of these classical Greek and Latin texts. So that if you, say, Homer Odyssey 10.1, like everybody will know what that is. This is not the case in Coptic, where because, we have a lot of unpublished manuscripts, we have manuscripts that are broken up in different libraries. And so maybe even if they're published, you might have pages that are published in different books that go together. We do not have such a clear system of identifying works, identifying chapters or verses, or passages. Like none of that is the same. So we actually we've started creating versification systems for our text because we needed to be able to number sentences so that people can refer back to them and cite them. There's not, typical canonical systems like there is in Greek and Latin. So likewise, reading fragmented texts is a real issue in Coptic studies, and it's an issue for our project. So if we want to publish a letter by this monastic author, Shanuta, we might have to publish text from manuscripts in 3, 4, or 5 different libraries, right? These are all fragments of the same letter that are in different places. And so the good news is that our website is the only place you can read some things from start to finish. The bad news is that it takes some time and thought and organizing to figure out how are you going to, annotate, and how are you going to present these fragments in a way that makes sense to people, right? So if I want to read something from beginning to end and it's in fragments, how do I present that on the screen in a way so that people can actually just read through the text? So and also, you know, how do I get all the manuscript fragments? How do I get the photographs of all the fragments and, you know, digitize them? So the fragmented texts are a challenge for us. And then word segmentation and lemmatization standards for Coptic are not universally standardized and recognized internationally. And this may sound a little strange if you're working in Greek or Latin, perhaps. You know, what is a word? And in Latin, it might be very obvious, you know, what's a word. But in Coptic, it's not always obvious what's a word, right? What counts as a compound word, or what's a word? What's a group that's kind of chunked together, like I showed you in that example with "since I became a monk," or, you know, it's not clear to the scholarly community and, you know, clearly agreed upon by the scholarly community what counts as a word, and then what is the lemma for each word, right? If you have multiple attestations of spellings, for example, right, what's the main lemma? So these are all issues that, you know, we work through on a regular basis as we're digitizing text, but also that we work through in collaboration with our partners in Germany for the dictionary. You can imagine, you know, creating the dictionary. One project creates the lexicon files for the Egyptian words. One project creates the lexicon files for the Greek loanwords. One project puts them online in a digital interface. That's 3 projects, right, with 3 groups of people. And so we all have to talk about, okay, is this a lemma? What's a lemma? What are we gonna do with compounds? What are we gonna do with phrases that are in dictionary entries? So that's a lot of ongoing conversation that happens in real time. And so this collaboration across a kind of non-standardized discipline is a challenge. It's also really exciting, right? It's exciting to be able to have put up this online dictionary. It's exciting to have it linked back to our digitized text. But it is an ongoing process of conversations that have to happen. All right, let's see. So we are about out of time. So I'm going to just say our goals, to end by saying our goals for future work, we want to put more texts online. We want to do more analysis of these texts. And we're also working now on entity recognition. So we currently do have all proper names tagged as proper names. But not necessarily as particular entities, right? So you couldn't search for all places, or you couldn't search for all people. You could search for all proper names. So we're working on entity recognition next. So stay tuned for that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. This was fantastic, really great presentation and an impressive project. I'm really astonished by the complexity of the material you work on and, you know, the richness of the tool that you managed to develop. Before, you know, I start, you know, bombarding you with a list of questions, I see that Anissa has also written some. Can you see them in the chat?
Okay, hold on. Let me go to the chat. Let me stop the screen share, maybe. I can go back to the screen share if we want. Did it stop the screen share? Yeah, okay. So, hi, Anise. Okay. Oh, yes, our project has
I think
developed
you're still screen sharing. We don't see you.
Hold on.
Okay.
I don't know how to stop you. Oh, here we go. Cancel. Is that better?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, yay. Okay. Yes. So so Anise has a question about what we do for manual annotations, how we've you know, developed the tools, and do we plan to have our tree banked corpus searchable by another another search interface, Tundra. So, all right, so I'll start with the annotations. We are not currently using any set of questions specifically about Esmeralda, which is a tool for annotating. We are not using that now. We are using, as I mentioned, we're using our a tool we ended up developing called Gitdox. And let me just screen share real quickly. And it depends on the annotation, right? So some of the annotations we make using this tool called Gitdox, which can you can annotate XML and also kind of multi-layered data. But for other annotations, you know, like the tree banking or the entity, we use different tools. So we have a kind of, we have a variety of tools that we use. And a lot of them are listed here on our tools page. I don't know your question about will the tree banks be searchable in another interface like Tundra. I don't know, but I will ask Amir. He kind of is in charge of all the tree banking. I will say our tree bank corpus is in the universal dependencies project. So if you're familiar, the universal dependencies is this project that sets up tree bank data for all different languages using the same framework. So you can do research across different languages. And so our Coptic tree banks are in universal dependencies. So if you're familiar with that at all, you can use that. And then, hold on, let me see if I can. All right, did I get rid of the screen share? No, I'm still screen sharing. Hold on, let me see. There we go. Okay. And then the tools for the project, we built some of them from scratch, some of them based on other tools, right? So our part of speech tagger, we originally built using the tree tagger tool, which is designed to be used on different languages if you have good training data, right? So we had to create a lot of training data, which we then trained tree tagger on. We're in the process of trying to move towards more machine learning based tools. But again, we need lots of data. So, you know, we just keep trying to make our data better, produce more data so we can make that transition. But the, you know, machine learning and deep learning tools tend to require, you know, larger data sets. But since they're on our web service, right? So Annie said a question about, you know, user-friendly tools. Since they're on our web service, you know, you could copy and paste Coptic texts into the web service. Here, right? So this is the web. I showed a screenshot of the web service. If you have a lot of text, you can also, we have an API that you can use as well. But you don't have to use all of the tools, right? If you just want to normalize and tag and lematize, you can do that, right? So that you don't have to use all the tools. Once you get into parsing, your annotations kind of get a bit strung out. And there are a lot of them. So, you know, if all you want to do is lematize, you know, you could just click down to lematizing, for example. we have found that it is, whoops, I don't know what I'm doing here, but here we go. We have found that using different tools and interfaces do sometimes have a steep learning curve. So that's why we try to put some sample queries into our website, you know, on our page, and there's links to sample queries. And then we try to do workshops, places where we know there will be Coptic users. So, yes.
Just to build on top of your last of the last thing that you said about the sample queries, which I think they are really really useful to have an idea of, you know, how to use a service. Do you know what users have, you know, applied this resource for?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you know of some case studies?
Yeah. So we, a lot of people use the dictionary. I mean, everybody, you know, people across the world use the dictionary, that we know. Most people in kind of my kind of discipline, history, religious studies, philology, tend to use the database for word search, right? They want to find instances of particular words. We do know some linguists who've used the linguistic annotations in corpora to do some research. There was a paper on, now I can't remember the topic, but there was just recently a paper a couple months ago by a couple of researchers in industry, like from Microsoft, I think Microsoft and Google, or Microsoft and Yahoo or something, and an academic who did a paper on kind of language and machine learning and language processing, where they needed to do research across several languages. And they chose Coptic as one of the languages because we were in that universal dependencies resource, right? Our tree bank text was there. And so, you know, they compared Coptic and Polish and, you know, something else, right? So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's very nice.
So we do know people are using, yeah. So we do know people who are using it, using different resources for different different things. Yeah. The major barrier to more research is actually wanting more text, right? A lot of times, especially like history or religious studies or classics or Egyptology, you know, people will be working on a particular topic and a particular set of documents, right? And if that set of documents isn't in there, then, you know, it's a limit to what you can do. So that's why over the next couple of years, part of our goal is to really try to increase the amount of data we have so that it can be more useful for more people.
So if I may, you know, I had one last question exactly on this point.
Yeah.
I mean, you presented this as a collaborative project, both, you know, in the cooperation, you know, in the ecosystem of other Coptic projects, which I think it's fantastic. But also, if I understood correctly, you are open to contributions from the users themselves, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
yes.
Is there any? I mean, anyone can contribute. Is there an editorial board? Is there, let's say, a verification or validation process, or anyone can, you know, upload the documents they're interested in so that they can, you know, work on that basically?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great question. So we welcome, you know, users to contribute text, or if you want to review any of the machine annotations or add your own annotations. So any of those are welcome. And right now, in order to access the annotation and editing environment, you need a username and you need to like contact basically me or Amir or somebody on the project to get access. So, just let me know if you're interested. And again, it could be text or it could be, annotation. So one of the things that I tell people is, if you're working on a text that maybe it's already in our system and it's only machine annotated, right? There hasn't been an editorial review. And you want to go in and you want to make corrections. If you see errors in the machine annotation, then let me know, and you are welcome. We're welcome to do that. And then yes, everything is typically reviewed by one of the editors before publication, and we have metadata in each document that says, has the tagging been, is it automatic or is it checked, which means a human has checked it, or is it kind of gold standard where somebody has gone through and checked everything, they've tree banked it, and so we have it's a high likelihood it's really
correct.
Super accurate. Yeah. So those are sort of the three different levels. And anything that's, called checked or gold certainly is reviewed before going online. Yeah.
I confess that I'm tempted to go and learn Coptic, and I was also wondering if the fact that this can actually be used as a teaching tool, even self-teaching tool, was that from the beginning it was already one of the goals, or you discovered after you started building it that this was actually a very interesting application?
It's been a goal from the beginning, because there are a lot of people who will take, say, one semester of Coptic, right? They're in graduate school, either, in biblical studies or classics or, papyrology, and maybe Coptic isn't their primary research language, right? And they take one semester and then, because they need to know some of it, but they're not really an expert, right? So there's a lot of people out there like that. And then another goal is also, there are a lot of people who are Coptic Orthodox, right? For whom this is their cultural heritage, but they may not know Coptic because Coptic is no longer used as a spoken conversational language, right? So especially where we have texts that have English translation, that makes it more accessible to Copts in the diaspora where they, speak English. Like, there are large populations in England, the US, Canada, Australia, that are English speaking. So, yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think we have reached our time limit, but thank you. This was really useful and very engaging presentation. Thank you also to everyone that followed the semester that ends today, and for the people that cannot have enough of Sunoikisis's digital classics. We'll be back at the beginning of October with the module on culture heritage. So thanks, Carrie, again, and goodbye, everyone.